the life of a perfect Southern California society housewife, until that life was shattered in a case that made headlines. Notorious woman number 12 is Betty Broderick.
She married somebody till death do us part, and she was going to make that happen.
Betty Biseglia met a handsome student named Dan Broderick at Notre Dame in 1965. The two soon became a couple.
They were together for a long time, had the ideal relationship, then the ideal marriage. She supported him while he went to school and got his law degree. She took care of the family, took care of the house. Basically, was your picture-perfect housewife.
They lived in very low-income areas in Boston. They were on food stamps. She would work nights. She would babysit. She would do what she could to put him through school so that he didn't have to work.
In the late 1970s, the family moved to San Diego, where Dan began his career as a malpractice attorney. For Betty, years of sacrifice finally appeared to be paying off.
They had multiple houses, they had a nanny, they had a housekeeper. They were living the life of very well-to-do, affluent people in the San Diego area.
But married life wasn't all Betty hoped it would be. By Dan's 38th birthday in 1983, he and Betty were having real problems.
After about 16 years of marriage, Danny Broderick hired a young, very attractive woman as his personal assistant. He had met her at some type of social function, and he even remarked to his wife, "Look how pretty she is." Well, before long she was working for him, and not much after that they were having an affair.
In February 1985, Dan announced he was leaving Betty. Betty didn't take the news well.
Betty Broderick was so enraged over her husband's infidelity, burned up his clothes, ran a car into his house, spray painted his property, left obscene messages on his voicemail.
She began making unannounced visits to his house using children's keys. She came over to his house at one point and found a Boston cream pie that Linda had made him and smeared it all over his suits.
He liked this power struggle to some degree because he really did egg her on. And rather than seeing the things she did as a sign for help, he saw, yay, she did something stupid again, it's evidence.
After a protracted and bitter legal battle, Dan and Betty's divorce became official in January 1989.
This was a case of vengeance, emotional torment, violence. Children were pitted in between the two of them. It was ugly.
Less than 9 months after the divorce, Dan married his assistant, Linda. The marriage didn't last long. Betty made sure of that on November 5th, 1989.
At this point, it was probably around 5 o'clock in the morning. She decided that she wanted to go for a drive. She actually went to Dan and Linda's home. She had keys that she had retrieved from her daughter, so she went into the house, went up to the bedroom, didn't turn any lights on, and she emptied her .38 caliber revolver, all 5 shots, into the bedroom. 1 shot hit a side table, 2 shots hit Linda, once in the head and once in the chest. 1 shot hit the wall, and then 1 shot hit Dan in the back.
Betty ran from the house. She called a close friend and told her, "I need help." A few hours later, Betty turned herself in.
Betty didn't deny anything. She said she went into the house, that she was armed with the revolver, and that her intention was to confront her ex-husband and then kill herself.
Betty was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. She pled not guilty.
The plea was a battered woman's defense, a psychological defense, one where we had talked about manslaughter, someone who was drove to that edge through really being hammered psychologically until they had to fight back.
At the trial, Betty's lawyer painted her as the victim, not the aggressor.
Betty had built through years and sweat and toil a whole life. Dan loved that life. He just removed Betty from that and put a substitute in there. So she saw her life go on the way she planned and built it, just she was no longer in it.
I was just a mess. Everything just came down on me. And I just couldn't stand it another minute.
Betty admitted to shooting Dan, but denied it was a premeditated act.
The movement that I made into their bedroom woke them up, and they moved, and somebody screamed, "Call the police," and I said, "No!" And I just fired the gun, and this big noise went off.
The prosecution offered a different explanation.
She ambushed them. That's what she did. She snuck in on them. And before they had a chance to say anything, before they had a chance to do anything to protect themselves, she blew them away.
Betty Broderick's 1990 trial ended with a hung jury. 10 favored a murder conviction. 2 favored the lesser charge of manslaughter. Broderick was retried the following year.
The second trial was more challenging in a number of ways. Basically, evidence that was not allowed in for the prosecution on the first case, all that evidence was let in. A lot of our evidence was kept out. A number of our experts weren't allowed to testify.
This time, the jury's decision was unanimous. Betty Broderick was convicted of second-degree murder.
Her final sentence was 32 to life. If Betty had had the benefits of the law, of people recognizing the psychological effects of women being battered both physically and psychologically, the result would have been different.
Betty will be eligible for parole in 2010. Coming up, you won't suspect the ugly truth about a pretty preacher's wife.